Well, we have made our way now to the fifth and final question, the final 8 articles of this treatise on the last end, and this is the attainment of happiness. And the more I dig into these 5 questions in this treatise, I really think that this is extremely important. I'm hesitant to say this is the most important part of the Summa, but I think in many ways it is, because if our goal is union with God, if our goal is the vision of the divine essence and to be ultimately happy, well, how are we going to attain it? Is our nature going to allow us to attain it? So this is very fundamental. And I also think if you have kids or grandkids, or if you're a teacher, this is something that really needs to be stressed, because we all want to be happy. And if we don't know how we are going to be happy, then our life will be pointless. And it also plays into the whole role of nature. As you'll see in this first article in a moment, is that we have natures along with the angels that uniquely qualify us by our nature through the grace of God to be happy. So I hope you'll enjoy these 8 articles, because I do think they're extremely important. Article 1 says whether man can attain happiness. And again, what he's going to get at here is, yes, we are rational creatures, and therefore, because our nature allows us to know God, have a vision of God, which the other 8.7 million species of visible creatures can't do that, okay? The cricket and the grasshopper and the dragonfly and the dog and the monkey can't achieve true happiness in the way that St. Thomas is going to talk about right here. This is just a very short paragraph. He says, happiness is the attainment of the perfect good. Whoever, therefore, is capable of the perfect good can attain happiness. Now, that man is capable of the perfect good is proved both because his intellect can apprehend the universal and perfect good, and because his will can desire it, and therefore man can attain happiness. This can be proved again from the fact that man is capable of seeing God as stated in, question 12, in which vision, as we stated above, man's perfect happiness consists. And so if we're unique in this regard and we can come to know God, well, let's pay attention to how exactly we are all able to attain that, and what this whole question is about. All right, and Article 2 says whether one man can be happier than another. And Thomas says happiness implies 2 things: the last end itself, which is the sovereign good, and the attainment or enjoyment of that same good. As to that good itself, which is the object and cause of happiness, one happiness cannot be greater than another, since there is but one sovereign good, namely God. Okay, so your ultimate good is the same as my ultimate good. All the people in this picture, the ultimate good is the same thing. It's the vision of God, who is He is the universal goodness, right? That's what we want to unite ourselves with and become perfectly happy. Okay, so he says, God, by enjoying whom men are made happy. But as to the attainment or enjoyment of this good, one man can be happier than another, because the more a man enjoys this good, the happier he is. Now that one man enjoys God more than another happens through his being better disposed or ordered to that enjoyment of him. And in this sense, one man can be happier than another. Now, as soon as you hear that, you hopefully have this curiosity, this interest of like, okay, how can I dispose myself to have greater happiness, to know God as best as I possibly can? And remember, back in chapter 12 of Prima Pars, he talked about the 2 things that that are going to determine our degree of happiness in heaven are charity and desire. Do you love God, and do you desire God? And so this should be a daily prayer. I want to love you more, God, and I want to desire you more. Okay, on to Article 3, whether one can be happy in this life. Can we be perfectly happy? You probably kind of know where Thomas is going to go with this one. He says a certain participation of happiness can be had in this life, but perfect and true happiness cannot be had in this life. This may be seen from a 2-fold consideration. And I'll just pause and say, this is a great teaching tool. If you have children and they have bad days or bad weeks or bad years, say, well, you're never going to be perfectly happy in this life, but there is a way that you will be perfectly happy, but don't try to attain perfect happiness here because it's impossible. But here's the way that we are able to achieve that happiness that all people desire. First, from a general notion of happiness. For since happiness is a perfect and sufficient good, it excludes every evil and fulfills every desire. But in this life, evil cannot be excluded. For this present life is subject to many unavoidable evils, to ignorance on the part of the intellect, to inordinate affection on the part of the appetite, and to many penalties on the part of the body, right? The body gets old, the body gets sick, it gets decrepit. Eventually people lose their minds and their ability to get around, right? It's just the natural way that our bodies post-original sin are in this condition. Secondly, from a consideration of the specific nature of happiness, that is the vision of the divine essence, which man cannot obtain in this life, as was shown above. Hence it is evident that none can attain true and perfect happiness in this life. How many people try to find the perfect happiness in this life? It's good to be reminded that it is a fool's errand to try that. Whether happiness once had can be lost. He says, if we speak of imperfect happiness, such as that can be had in this life, in this sense, it can be lost. This is clear of contemplative happiness, which is lost either by forgetfulness, for instance, when knowledge is lost through sickness, or again by certain occupations whereby a man is altogether withdrawn from contemplation. This is also clear from active happiness, since man's will can be changed so as to fall to vice from virtue, in whose act happiness principally consists. Okay, so that's kind of the state of life. We do well, we practice virtue, and then we fall. We go to confession, and then we start over again. That's just the way things go. But if we speak of that perfect happiness which we await after this life, it must be observed that Origen, following the error of certain Platonists, held that man can become unhappy after the final happiness. Okay, so Origen got a lot wrong. He said even when you get to heaven and you attain that perfect happiness, even then you can fall out of it. But Thomas says this, however, is false for two reasons. First, from the general notion of happiness, for since happiness is the perfect and sufficient good, it must needs set man's desire at rest and exclude every evil. Now, man naturally desires to hold to the good that he has and to have surety of his holding, else he must of necessity be troubled with the fear of losing it, or with the sorrow of knowing that he will lose it. Therefore, it is necessary for true happiness that man have the assured opinion of never losing that good that he possesses. Secondly, is evident if we consider the specific nature of happiness. For it has been shown above that man's perfect happiness consists in the vision of the divine essence. Now it is impossible for anyone seeing the divine essence to wish not to see it, because every good that one possesses and yet wishes to be without is either insufficient, something more sufficing being desired in its stead, or else has some inconvenience attached to it. But the vision of the divine essence fills the soul with all good things, since it unites to the source of all goodness. Okay, so in heaven, there's no way you'll ever turn back. You're irrevocably united to God, and why would you ever separate yourself when you're not united with Him? But here below, St. Thomas Aquinas says we don't have that benefit. We have participation. We have little, bits here and there of happiness and pleasures and, good days and bad days, but we can always fall out of it, right? Whether man can attain happiness by his natural powers. He says, imperfect happiness that can be had in this life can be acquired by man by his natural powers in the same way as virtue, in whose operation it consists. But man's perfect happiness consists in the vision of the divine essence. Now, the vision of God's essence surpasses the nature not only of man, but of every single creature. But every knowledge that is according to the mode of created substances falls short of the vision of the divine essence, which infinitely surpasses all created substance. Consequently, neither man nor any creature, including the angels, can attain final happiness by his natural powers. Okay, so even in heaven, we can't achieve the happiness that St. Thomas Aquinas is talking about by our natural powers. There's going to have to be an infusion of grace, the illumination of the intellect, in order to achieve that perfect happiness that we desire. Whether man attains happiness through the action of some higher creature. Now, the higher creature, of course, there's only one other higher creature, and that would be the angels. So he's saying, can the angels help us attain to happiness? He says, since every creature is subject to the laws of nature, from the very fact that its power and action are limited, that which surpasses created nature cannot be done by the power of any creature. Consequently, if anything need be done that is above nature, it must be done by God immediately. Happiness is a good surpassing created nature. Therefore, it is impossible that it be bestowed through the action of any creature, but by God alone is man made happy, if we speak of perfect happiness. Now, I think the angels can assist us to achieve and maybe get there, and they can inspire us and enlighten us. But ultimately, when it all comes down, it's only God that can really get us over that finish line so that we, through his grace, can attain to that ultimate happiness. Article 7, whether any good works are necessary that man may receive happiness from God. Now, this is a very contested point because, Protestants will say Catholics, try to work their way into heaven, or, works righteousness and that kind of thing. And this is interesting what he says here, because he says rectitude of the will is necessary for happiness, since it is nothing else than the right order of the will to the last end, and it is therefore necessary for obtaining that end. So our will has to be directed to the final end in order for us to achieve it, right? But this does not prove that any work of man need proceed for his happiness. For God could make a will having a right tendency to the end and at the same time attaining the end. But the order of divine wisdom demands that this should not be true, right? So God doesn't just force our hand and force us into happiness. There is going to be some participation, from the creature, right? Now, to possess the perfect good without movement belongs to that which has it naturally, and to have happiness naturally belongs to God alone. Therefore, it belongs to God alone, not to be moved towards happiness by any previous operation. Now, since happiness surpasses every created nature, no pure creature can becomingly gain happiness without the movement of operation whereby it tends thereto. But the angel, who is above man in the natural order, obtained it according to the order of divine wisdom by one movement of a meritorious work. Remember how angels are judged the moment they're created. They basically merit beatitude, or they're damned irrevocably by one act of merit, one decision at the moment that they are created, as was explained before. Whereas man obtains it by many movements of works which are called merits. Wherefore also, according to the philosopher, happiness is the reward of works of virtue. Now, there is going to be a whole section in the second part of the Summa about justification, about merit, about divine grace. And Thomas is going to come down and say it's divine ordination, where God always makes the first move. God provides the grace that we respond to, but it is going to take an act of merit. Even Jesus merited salvation through his death on the cross, right? Jesus merited through his human nature, right? And so that's important. And that's, again, a controversial teaching of Catholicism, but grace always precedes anything that we do, and without God's grace, we could never achieve it. Finally, does every man and woman desire happiness? Thomas says happiness can be considered in two ways. First, according to the general notion of happiness, and thus of necessity, every man desires happiness. For the general notion of happiness consists in the perfect good, as stated above. But since good is the object of the will, The perfect good of a man is that which entirely satisfies his will. Consequently, to desire happiness is nothing else than to desire that one's will be satisfied. And this is consistent in all people. We all want our will to be satisfied. We all seek the good, whether it be through our sensitive appetite or intellectual appetite, which is the will. And this everyone desires. Secondly, we may speak of happiness according to its specific notion as to that in which it consists. And thus all do not know happiness because they know not in what thing the general notion of happiness is found. And consequently, in this respect, not all desire it. Wherefore, the point here is that, in our very nature, in our very being, we are created to desire the good. All right. But since some people don't know what that ultimate good is, they're not studying Thomistic philosophy. They don't know that our ultimate good is the beatific vision, which is our ultimate happiness. They're running after pleasure. They're running after fame. They're running after money. And so they've put their end at some stair-step path that could lead ultimately to happiness, but they don't know what the true happiness is, and therefore they don't desire God because they don't know it, right? So I hope that made sense. I find these 8 articles of this question to be extremely important, and I think every single person needs to study this question, especially young people, to realize that, first of all, they'll never achieve perfect happiness on earth, and secondly, that which is their ultimate happiness that they are to attain is the divine essence, union with God. And if we attach and direct our will to that, all these other good things that are good but not the ultimate good can be seen in light of that journey to the final good. Thank you for joining me for these 5 questions in the treatise in the last end, and this will bring us to an end of this treatise, and tomorrow we'll start with a new treatise as we journey through the Summa, one question at a time. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. God bless you.